She didn't even realize it at first. For most of her life, she was just living, reacting, surviving, doing what she thought she was supposed to do. But underneath that surface was a program running, a set of unconscious beliefs, thoughts, and emotional patterns that weren't really hers. They were passed down from her mother, from her grandmother, from the environments they grew up in. This wasn't about blame. This was about awareness. Because until we become aware of what's running us, we think we are the ones in control. But we're not. We're just repeating the pain, the doubt, the scarcity, repeating the fear. She began to notice it. The way she always expected something to go wrong just when things felt good. The way she held back from speaking her truth because somewhere, buried deep, was the belief that she wasn't allowed to take up space. The way her body tensed when someone raised their voice, not because of the present, but because of memories she couldn't even fully recall. And then it hit her, this isn't me, this isn't who I really am, it's who I became in order to survive a pattern that started long before I was even born. That moment of awareness that asterisk was the beginning of transformation. Because you cannot change what you are not willing to observe. She realized she had been rehearsing a version of herself that was never fully her choice. It was inherited. It was built from reactions, conditions, and emotional imprints absorbed from her family, culture, and childhood. And until that moment, she had never truly questioned it. Most people live their entire lives that way, just reliving yesterday's emotions, thinking yesterday's thoughts, and calling it a life. But the truth is, you cannot create a new future holding on to the emotions of the past. She began to see the ways she was emotionally addicted to certain experiences, stress, anxiety, guilt, not because she wanted to be, but because they were familiar. Familiarity feels safe to the body even when it's suffering. That's how deep the programming goes. She started sitting with herself, not to judge, but to become aware. She began catching her thoughts. Catching the moment she would think, asterisk, I'm not good enough, asterisk, and instead of believing it, she would pause. Where did that thought come from? Who did I hear say that? When did I first start thinking that way? And in the space between the thought and the reaction, she found something powerful. Choice. See, the moment you become aware, you step outside the old self. You're no longer asleep in the pattern, you're watching it. And when you're watching it, you're not asterisk in asterisk it. That's how she began the process, not by changing everything overnight, but by becoming intimately aware of the internal dialogue that was shaping her reality every single day. It wasn't always easy. The body wanted to return to the familiar. The mind wanted to pull her back into the old story, but she persisted, because once you wake up, you can't unsee it. Once you become aware, you can't go back to being unconscious. And slowly, gently, she began to see the truth, that the version of herself she had accepted as normal was actually a product of unhealed wounds, not her essence. She started to feel the difference. Moments that once triggered her began to lose their power. Emotional patterns that once dictated her behavior began to dissolve, and what replaced them, stillness, clarity, presence, she began to connect with a deeper part of herself, one that wasn't defined by history or trauma or expectation. One that was wise, whole, and limitless. That's when the shift really began. Not because she forced it, but because she observed it. And in observing it, she disempowered it. The chain of generational programming was breaking. Not because someone saved her, not because circumstances changed, but because she asterisk saw it asterisk. Awareness is the first act of self-liberation. The light that begins to crack the wall. And once the light gets in, the wall can never be whole again. She wasn't just healing for herself. She was breaking patterns that had been unconsciously repeated for decades, maybe centuries. And with every new breath of awareness, with every thought she questioned, with every emotion she refused to recycle, she was building something new. She was no longer the echo of her lineage. She was becoming the voice of her future. This is the power of presence. This is where it all begins. She finally realized, asterisk, this isn't who I am, it's who I've been taught to be, and I don't have to keep living it. Asterisk, once she became aware of the patterns she was living in, the next question became, now what? Awareness is powerful, but transformation requires more than just noticing. We have to recondition the mind and body to a new way of being. and that's exactly what she committed to doing. She knew that she had rehearsed her past long enough. The memories, the emotions, the familiar identity, it was all so deeply wired into her brain and body that it had become automatic. She would wake up each day and unconsciously reconnect to the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and behave in the same ways, not realizing that each time she did, she was reinforcing the very life she no longer wanted. She realized that to change her life, she had to start living from a new script, not the one that was passed down to her, not the one shaped by trauma or limitation, a new one. But to do that, she couldn't just think differently. She had to become someone different. And the process of becoming begins with reprogramming the subconscious. The part of her that was still addicted to the past, still wired for survival, still clinging to old emotions as if they were part of her identity. She began practicing mental rehearsal every morning. She wasn't visualizing random fantasies. She was training her brain to believe in a new future. She would sit in stillness, close her eyes, and see herself walking with confidence, speaking with clarity, smiling with real joy. She would imagine moments where she would normally shut down, and instead she saw herself staying open. She rehearsed forgiveness, she rehearsed power, she rehearsed peace, and the more she rehearsed those elevated states, the more natural they began to feel. She wasn't just imagining anymore. She was conditioning her nervous system to a new emotional baseline. She was teaching her body what the future felt like before it even happened. And this is so important, because if we keep waking up and feeling the same way we did yesterday, we're programming our future with our past. She refused to keep doing that. She stopped getting out of bed until she felt like the future version of herself, grounded, calm, powerful. Not because her life had changed yet, but because she was changing. And as her inner world began to shift, so did everything around her, but make no mistake, this wasn't magic, this was self-mastery. She understood that the brain doesn't know the difference between a real experience and one that is deeply imagined with emotional intensity. So she gave herself the experience of being free, over and over again, until her body believed it was real. That's when the old patterns began to lose their grip, not by force but by neglect. She stopped feeding them, she stopped energizing them with her thoughts, with her feelings, with her attention. And here's the thing, at first it felt unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because the known, even if painful, often feels safer than the unknown, but she kept choosing the unknown. She kept walking into that space where her new self could exist. And slowly her mind and body began to follow. What used to trigger her didn't anymore. What used to pull her into self. Doubt became an opportunity to reaffirm her worth. She wasn't reacting from the old programs. She was responding from her future. That's what it means to reprogram the subconscious. Not just shifting thoughts, but rehearsing a new way of being until it becomes second nature. She didn't need the world to change for her to feel whole. She became whole, and the world adjusted. Each morning she reminded herself, today I am not living as the version of me shaped by fear or pain. Today I am showing up as the architect of my life. And then she lived that way, thought by thought, emotion by emotion, breath by breath. The brain began to rewire. The body began to remember a new emotional signature. And with consistency, those new circuits became the foundation of her new identity. She wasn't trying to become someone new. She was finally remembering who she had always been beneath the programming, and that's when everything began to align, not by chance but by design. The real shift happened when she started choosing differently, over and over again, even when it was hard. Because becoming the architect of your life isn't a one-time breakthrough. It's a daily decision to no longer feed the old self. It's the moment when you stop asking, why does this always happen to me? And instead ask, what can I choose now that I've never chosen before? That's when everything begins to change, not because life suddenly gets easier, but because you becomes stronger, wiser, more deliberate. She began to see that every emotion she used to live by, fear, guilt, self-doubt, was tied to the past. Each time she let those emotions drive her behavior, she was repeating the same story, but now she caught herself. When she wanted to shut down in discomfort, she opened up instead. When the impulse came to please others at the cost of her truth, she paused and chose honesty. When the fear whispered that she should stay small, she stepped forward with courage, even if her voice trembled. These weren't just symbolic acts, they were rewrites. Every new choice she made became an interruption to the old program. And with every interruption, she weakened the neural and emotional circuits that had once run her life. But this didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a dramatic transformation overnight. It was slow, intentional, and sacred. Because every small choice matters, she understood that the body had been conditioned for years, even decades, to respond automatically, to react out of protection, to retreat out of habit, to repeat the past because it felt familiar. But she made a new agreement with herself. Familiar is not the goal, freedom is. And freedom only comes when we choose the unknown over the predictable. So she kept showing up. She kept becoming aware of the split second where she could either fall back into the past or step into a new future. And that space, that tiny space between stimulus and response, became her power. That's where she built the new her. That's where she stopped rehearsing her wounds and began rehearsing her wisdom. People around her noticed the difference. Not because she was trying to prove anything, but because her energy changed. She didn't have to announce it. The way she carried herself spoke louder than words. She was no longer reactive, no longer chasing approval, no longer spinning in cycles that led nowhere. Instead, she began responding to life from her vision, not her memory. She started asking, "What would the woman I'm becoming do in this moment?" And then she acted from that place, not perfectly but consistently, even when it was uncomfortable, especially when it was uncomfortable, because she knew that growth and comfort rarely live in the same space. She forgave herself for the times she slipped into old behaviors. Not because she accepted them, but because she understood the brain and body were just learning. And just like a child learning to walk, she gave herself the grace to stumble, to stand, and to walk again. With each step, her identity shifted. She was no longer choosing based on fear. She was choosing from alignment, from clarity, from a place deep inside her that had been silent for so long, just waiting to lead. And the more she listened to that inner voice, the louder it became. This is how she broke the cycle, not by fighting the past, but by no longer feeding it. Not by waiting for external permission, but by giving herself full authority. She wasn't trying to be someone else. She was becoming more of who she truly was, without all the conditioning layered on top. And eventually, the past stopped calling her back. The emotions that once had power over her began to feel like old echoes, distant, fading, no longer alive in her present. She could remember without reliving. She could observe without reacting. She could feel the old pull and still choose the new path. That's the moment the pattern broke, when reaction was replaced by presence. When habit was replaced by intention, when survival was replaced by self-leadership, and she knew with every fiber of her being that this wasn't just a change, it was a new beginning. The day she realized she was no longer living as a reaction to her past was the day she stepped into creation. Up until then, life had always felt like something that was happening to her. Moments unfolding, circumstances shifting, people coming and going, all of it outside of her control. But when she broke those old emotional patterns and started choosing differently, something incredible began to happen. The outer world started to reflect her inner world. That's when she understood that she wasn't just healing anymore, she was creating. She had moved from survival into design, from unconscious repetition into conscious intention. And in that space she felt something she hadn't felt in years, freedom. Not because everything was perfect, but because she no longer needed it to be. She wasn't waiting for someone to give her permission. She wasn't hoping life would finally give her what she'd been denied. She had become the one in charge, the one writing the script. Creation begins in the present moment, and that's where she lived now, right here, right now. She no longer woke up and thought about what went wrong yesterday. She didn't rehearse the old emotions that used to define her. She made a new agreement with herself. Asterisk, my energy is too valuable to be wasted on what no longer exists. Asterisk, she had spent enough time building her identity on memories that hurt. Now, she built it on possibilities that inspired. She saw her future not as some distant hope, but as something she could bring into her body now. She could feel it, breathe it, live from it, even before it showed up, and the more she lived from that elevated emotional state, the more it began to materialize. Opportunities came, relationships evolved. Challenges still arrived, but she met them with a new mind, a new heart, a new energy. She wasn't reacting anymore, she was designing. She was no longer the victim of her environment. She was the one shaping it. Every morning became sacred, a time to reconnect with her vision, to align with the version of herself she was stepping into. She asked herself, what does my future self feel like? And then she practiced being her. She didn't wait to feel worthy or powerful or at peace. She practiced those feelings daily until they became her new baseline, and here's the truth, she didn't need proof. She didn't need results to know it was working. Her trust came from within, because when you begin creating from the inside out, you realize that the most powerful evidence is how you feel, and she felt it. Lighter, freer, more grounded. Her nervous system wasn't on high alert anymore. Her thoughts weren't looping in fear. Her heart wasn't carrying the weight of old stories. She could walk into a room and not need to perform. She could speak and not second guess herself. She could say no without guilt. She could love without fear. That is what it means to live as the architect of your life. It means you stop waiting for permission, for healing, for the right timing. It means you become the source of the very things you've been chasing. The power wasn't outside of her, it never was. But it took breaking the generational chains, choosing differently, and rewiring her entire inner world to finally see that. And the most beautiful part, she didn't do it with force. She did it with presence, with discipline, with love. When she looked back, it wasn't with regret. It was with compassion, because every version of her, even the broken ones, brought her here. And now she carried all of them forward, integrated, healed, and free. She knew she wasn't just changing her life. She was changing the lives of everyone who would come after her. That's the ripple effect of becoming conscious. When one person breaks the cycle, they don't just rewrite their story. They rewrite the story for generations. She had become that person, and the future she once dreamed of, she was already living it. Because it was never about what she had. It was always about who she chose to be. She didn't just break the pattern, she built the blueprint.